Britney and Gina Wood were sisters. And not just sisters, but twins, which made it hard for the others to tell them apart. Even their own mother couldn't tell which one of the sisters was standing in front of her. From early childhood, the girls were used to seeing each other as their own reflection and often used this to achieve their goals. Britney, for example, could easily go to her sister's math tutor instead of Gina and ask her sister for a similar favor in return, but only in a different subject. I should put some marks on my forehead with a marker. After all, if I can't tell you apart, other people don't stand a chance, their mother said with a smile. However, despite looking exactly the same, the girls were completely different in character and mindset. Gina was calm and reasonable, and the complete opposite of Britney, who always got in all kinds of trouble. It was Britney who came up with the idea that they should take turns going to school, while one of them pretended to have a cold. Like an obedient girl, Gina didn't like this idea, but being very persistent, Britney still managed to convince her sister. Of course, the sisters' plans failed, and just 3 days later, they both had to blush in the principal's office and swear that it would never happen again. "I just can't take it anymore. God, I just can't wait for you two to graduate, so I could breathe a sigh of relief," Madeline Wood said. Time flew by, filling the life of the two sisters with all kinds of funny stories. Those who knew Britney and Gina personally were sure that after graduation, they would go off to college together. But things turned out to be quite different, and the two sisters took two very different paths in life. Gina dreamed of becoming a doctor ever since she was little, so she went to med school, while Britney decided to take acting classes, dreaming of one day conquering the big screen. It was then that the sisters' different approaches to schoolwork became obvious. Gina was able to complete what she started and get a diploma in general medicine, while Britney got expelled during her sophomore year for poor grades and attendance. Needless to say, Richard and Madeline Wood were very upset about it. "Come on, guys, they just couldn't appreciate my talent. It's okay, I'll figure something out," Britney said, trying to reassure her parents. While Gina was taking her first timid steps in medicine, Britney went from one extreme to another, desperately trying to find a job that could satisfy her ambitions. The next 3 years were uneventful. Gina became a therapist at the local hospital, just as she planned, and Britney got an odd job that couldn't cover even a third of her expenses on clothes and makeup. Of course, the parents helped their less successful daughter in any way they could, sincerely hoping that she would eventually change and finally get her act together. Over time, the constant lecturing from Britney's parents paid off, and she finally decided to find a permanent job. However, she decided to go about it in a rather peculiar way, which once again surprised her sister. "You want to get a job as a rich man's maid? But you've never done this kind of work before. How did you even come up with this idea?" Gina asked. "Of course I want this job. He's single, which is the most important thing. Just imagine, money in the bank, annual vacations to the Bahamas, and a house that looks like a castle," Britney said excitedly. Gina shook her head doubtfully. Her sister's idea seemed naive at the very best. But what Britney suggested a little later simply shocked Gina. "What? You want me to interview for the job instead of you? But why?" Gina exclaimed, dumbfounded. Her sister's question made Gina blush, but then she pulled herself together and replied, "What do you mean, why? To make a good impression. Let's stop pretending here. You're much smarter than I am, which means you can persuade this moneybag to hire you, or rather me, to work for him." Gina frowned. She was feeling very doubtful of her sister's idea. "Come on, sis, please, do it for me. Just this one time," Britney pleaded. Gina's face brightened and her lips stretched into a sweet smile. "Okay, what do I have to lose? I hope I won't have to work instead of you too," the young woman answered. Since the interview with Christopher Bennett was taking place at a restaurant, Gina showed up in her most beautiful dress. Of course, Britney saw her outfit as very modest, and if it were up to her, she'd have her sister put on a completely different dress with a cutout back and a breathtaking neckline. Having arrived at the restaurant pretending to be her sister, Gina glanced around and immediately saw a handsome man in his 30s who waved his hand invitingly at her. Christopher Bennett turned out to be a pleasant young man, exceptionally smart and interesting to talk to. The businessman was a self-made man who achieved everything in his life thanks to his determination and hard work. Christopher's parents were poor and couldn't help their son on his way to success. Looking at the intelligent young man, Gina caught herself thinking that her sister might have made the right choice for once. Of course, neither one of them was thinking about a romantic relationship. But isn't that precisely how great relationships begin? After asking Gina a couple of standard questions, Christopher was happy with her candidacy. Well, you can start work tomorrow. You won't have too many duties, cleaning the house, doing the laundry, and most importantly, caring for my beloved cat, Charlie. The businessman summed up, shaking the woman's hand in parting. Gina watched him leave, after which she took her phone out of her purse and called her sister. Wow, he hired me. You're a real magician, sis. I will definitely thank you properly when I become a millionaire, Britney exclaimed happily. Come on, try doing your job as a maid first, and then we'll talk about gratitude. Gina laughed. The next day, Britney was standing in Christopher's living room in the very revealing outfit, which she believed couldn't leave anyone who considered themselves a real man indifferent. But the owner of the house had other things in mind at the time. Christopher couldn't understand how this new maid changed so much in such a short time. She was a sweet and kind young woman just yesterday, and now she was this aggressively attractive woman in heels. A week passed. During this time, Britney got used to the daily routine of the owner of the house, and deep down was glad that she managed to get such a great job. The ginger cat, Charlie, didn't give her any trouble, and there wasn't all that much housework. However, the young woman couldn't make any progress on her actual plan to trick the young millionaire into marrying her or even getting involved with her at all. Time passed, but Christopher Bennett was keeping his distance, just as before. He's really strange. Any other man would have been lying at my feet 2 days after we met, or even sooner. What's wrong with him? What does he even want with his life? Britney kept asking herself the same question. To the chagrin of the young beauty, all of her tricks to seduce the rich man turned out to be a waste of time and effort. If Christopher was having any kind of feeling for Britney, he never showed them and kept them to himself for the time being. After trying everything she could think of, Britney decided to turn to a so-called specialist, namely the psychic Muriel Garcia, whose ad she saw on some bulletin board on the street. It was rumored that she came from Central America, where she was rather famous for her talent. A love spell, a health spell, the elimination of rivals. That's what I need, Britney exclaimed. Having decided not to put things off, the young woman went to see the psychic that same day. Muriel Garcia turned out to be an obese woman of about 45 with a huge bouffant on her head. She was dressed in a black gown, which looked somewhat reminiscent of a priest's cassock. Giving her guest an appraising look, Muriel got ready to listen. Hello, I'd like to get a love powder or love potion, something like that. Britney began, embarrassed by her own frankness. The woman paused for a long time, after which she said, I can see the fire of love in your heart. I will help you and give you what you want, but remember to use it with great care. It's a very potent substance. It can both help you or harm the person you love. Yes, of course, I get it. I'll be careful. So I can have it now? Britney couldn't restrain herself, but then immediately froze under the heavy gaze of the psychic. Caution, you need to exercise extreme caution, the woman snarled. Then she went over to her table and took out a vial of God knows what from her drawer. It was some kind of a gray substance which looked a lot like paper ash. Here, add a little to their tea and you'll get what you want, the psychic said in a tone that brooked no objections. After paying the medium, Britney returned to Christopher Bennett's house. Well, finally, my dream will come true. Some potion in his tea and Christopher will be mine, Britney thought to herself. Needless to say, the woman could barely wait for the businessman to come home after work. As soon as Christopher sat down at the table, Britney immediately offered him tea. The businessman raised an eyebrow in surprise, after which he thought for a bit and nodded his head. But when Britney tried to pour a few grains out of the vial into the cup, all of its contents accidentally spilled into the tea. Of course, she remembered that the psychic told her that she couldn't pour the tea down the sink either. So she decided to risk it. Realizing that she had no other choice, Britney carefully stirred the tea and took it to Christopher. It's okay, it can't get any worse anyway, the woman reassured herself. Meanwhile, the young woman didn't even think that what she was doing could hurt the man. But as soon as Christopher took one sip of the tea, his face turned purple and his hands reached for his throat. God, was the psychic right? Is that thing really dangerous? Britney thought, clutching her head. Meanwhile, Christopher was getting worse. Trying to get a breath of air, he unbuttoned his shirt and pulled off his tie. Britney, on the other hand, was rushing around him, desperately trying to find a way out of this difficult situation. Gina, why didn't I think of her sooner? Britney exclaimed and reached for her phone in order to call her sister. Of course, Gina wasn't happy about her sister's confession. What were you thinking? I'm just a therapist. I don't work at an ICU. Call an ambulance and we'll see what to do next, the woman advised her sister. However, the far-sighted Britney quickly realized that if her involvement in Christopher's poisoning would be revealed, she would certainly be put on trial for attempted murder. Sis, come on, please. Help me out one more time. There has to be something you can do, like a shot or something. I don't know. Think of something, please, Britney pleaded. Having sighed sadly, Gina started putting together a bag of all the meds she might need. At the same time, she wasn't sure that she could help the man and was planning on calling the ambulance behind her sister's back. When Gina saw Christopher lying on the floor, she immediately realized that she was dealing with an allergic reaction. The potion that Britney had put in the businessman's tea was probably very concentrated, which caused him to have a severe allergic reaction. Fortunately, Gina had all the necessary meds with her. Having given the businessman an intramuscular injection, the woman stopped the allergy attack, which undoubtedly saved Christopher's life. Having opened his eyes, the businessman gasped in surprise. What happened to me? And why do I now have two maids? Gina and Britney looked at each other, then admitted that they were twin sisters. The woman also told the businessman about the love potion Britney bought from the psychic from Central America. Getting up from the floor, Christopher shook his head and went over to the phone. No, please don't call the police. It's all my fault, Gina pleaded. And how exactly is it your fault? Christopher asked in surprise. I was the one who came to the interview at the restaurant, remember? After all, if Britney came to the interview herself, you would never have hired her, Gina blurted out, blushing to the very roots of her hair. It was only then that Christopher realized why he didn't like his new maid. Even though the two women looked exactly the same, they couldn't have had more different characters and outlooks on life. Okay, you win, I won't call the police. But if anything like this ever happens again, I will sue you. Christopher changed his anger to mercy. In the depths of his soul, he knew that he wasn't going to call the police. After all, things turned out okay, and no one was harmed in the end. He knew that Britney had feelings for him, but he deliberately ignored them, hoping that her infatuation would pass on its own. The young man didn't just decide against calling the police after the accidental poisoning incident, but he even allowed Britney to keep her job as a maid. Of course, after everything that had happened, there was absolutely no way that there could ever be any kind of relationship between Britney and Christopher. But there was a different side to the story too. Having learned the name of the woman that he liked so much at the interview, Christopher directed all of his efforts at winning her heart. To Britney's credit, it is worth noting that she took it with due understanding and didn't interfere with her sister's chances to find her happiness. Soon, the eccentric woman turned her attention to another rich man, but this time she didn't need some love potion to seduce him. Actually, after that incident, the woman decided to only trust traditional medicine and grew to dislike all kinds of psychics, mediums, and fortune tellers. Gina and Christopher got married soon. It turned out that the young woman inadvertently won over his heart during their first meeting at the restaurant. There's a rumor going around that they rushed to tie the knot because the bride was already pregnant. And it's probably true. Especially since after the wedding, the couple had an ultrasound appointment, after which they went out and bought a stroller for twins.